Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
I have us on the fourth chapter of Shemot, really ready to start verse 18, the first verse of the sixth aliyah of Parshat Shemot, but I want to go back to one and a half things, and if there are other lingering things people want to go back to, that's fine as well. So just to remind us where we are, we're at the very end, essentially, of the interaction between God and Moshe at the burning bush. It's been happening for a long time. They've really been the only two characters, the only people speaking in the Torah for many verses. And since we do this class very slowly, we've been with them for a long time. And I gotta say, it's been kind of nice, right? It's nice to linger in these scenes. We every once in a while we mention this. It's just such a different experience than hearing the laning, and I love hearing the laning, and I love hearing the laning even, when it's sections of the Torah that I happen to know really well, and sections that I've spent less time on. I just love hearing the Torah being read. But it's what a different experience to really stay in a scene and pick it apart for all of its possibilities. So the last two verses we read, verses 16 or 17 in chapter 4, V'diberhu lecha el ha'am, that Aaron will speak on your behalf to the people, V'hayahu yeh lecha lapeh, and he will be for you as a mouth, V'atati lo Elohim, and you will be to him as an Elohim. I'll untranslate it for a second. V'atamateh hazeh, and this staff, Tikach biadecha, take in your hand, asher tasabo et ha'otot, and with it you shall do all of the signs that we've been discussing. And I think we went through all of the Rashi and all of that, including the Rashi on the word Elohim, where Rashi trying to make sense of what it means when God Elohim says to Moshe that your role vis-a-vis Aaron will be an Elohim. Rashi says L'Rav Ulasar. So the first thing that Rashi does is take it out of the realm of divinity, which is interesting that God has a concept of divinity that is not divine, right? In Rashi's imagination, God uses the name or one of the names of God to mean something other than God, which is just a fascinating thing. And it's particularly fascinating if you jump out to the meta level. Our text about God and the holy commentaries on it have God referring to a God concept, taken with some of its divinity taken out. I wanted to show you, because I don't think it was directly in the Rashi, that one of the, it's in several different versions of the Rashi we have in front of us. Some of them footnote to a place elsewhere in the Torah where Rashi gives a little bit more of an explanation of why it's so easy for him to translate Elohim to a word that doesn't mean God. So I want to show one of them to you. Okay, so let's go all the way back to the sixth chapter of Breshit, verse 2. Let's start with verse 1. These are some really interesting and odd verses that don't get a whole lot of attention because they're not part of our major story, as it were. Adam, or Ha'adam, humanity, began, Hechel is like Hitchil, Larov al Pnei Hadama. Larov seems to be a intransitive verb here, meaning to become Rav, to increase, although we would use in modern Hebrew Larov more as not as an infinitive verb, but referring to towards the many or to the many, or something happening in multiple. Across the face of the earth, Uvanot yuldu lehem, daughters were born to them. I don't want to linger on this, although we could, but I want to just set up basically the next line in Rashi. Vayiru v'nei Elohim et benot hadam. In the sixth chapter of Breshit, we have a reference to B'nei Elohim, the sons of the Elohim, and we don't know what to do with it. But the sons of the Elohim saw at Benot Hadam all those daughters of women. So are we talking here about some, like in Greek mythology where there is intimacy and production of offspring in between fully human and semi-divine beings? We don't know. Is this a relic of some ancient Canaanite mythology where that cross fertilization happened? We don't know. Or is this what God wants to understand about how humanity propagated on the earth? Ki tovot hena, for they were beautiful, or tov. Vayikhu lehem nashim, they, the Bnei Elohim, took them, the women, as wives, mikol asher bacharu, from all that they chose, meaning whatever they wanted to take, they took. Look what Rashi says on that. Bnei ha-Elohim, Bnei ha-Sarim v'ha-Shoftim, the sons of princes and rulers. You could ask yourselves the question on the Rashi, well, what princes and rulers? We're talking about like the Ur stages of humanity according to the Torah. And we're saying that like wouldn't those princes and rulers be included in the Adam who are having these daughters? It's a little bit of a vicious little circle here. Davar acher, b'nei ha-Elohim, another way of reading it is, who are the sons of Elohim? Heim hasarim ha'ochim b'shlichuto shel makom. These were the sarim. Here, sar does not mean a minister. Sar means an angel, an angelic being, who were doing on local shlichut. They were sent to local places on earth to represent some angelic or divine presence. Af heim hayu mitarbim behem. They also, these half divine beings, the angels, intermingled, lihit arev, to become mingled with. And here, become mingled with means to commingle sexually and reproductively. And now Rashi says a klal, a general principle that he's clearly referring to or relying on in our verse, a whole book of the Torah later. Kol Elohim shebamikra lashon marut. Every reference of God, every reference of Elohim in the Torah comes with it the language of marut. This is not marut like bitterness, but marut meaning mastery, right? Just pause right here. What's very strange about that line as a klal? Kol Elohim shebamikra lashon marut. Oops, where'd it go? What's strange about that as an overarching principle? Well, I find it strange. Well, sometimes Elohim means God.
Yeah.
Sometimes Elohim means Elohim. Unless what Rashi is saying here is that every time the word Elohim appears in the Torah, it has to do with authority, whether it's a human being of particular authority, or we're introducing God here in the scene as the God of authority. V'zeh yochiach, and this verse will prove it. What's the verse that he uses? Our verse. Vatati lo Elohim, and you, Moshe, will be to Aaron as an Elohim. Shemot, the fourth chapter Shemot. Re'ei netaticha Elohim. He also gives us a verse later on, which we'll get to in a couple of weeks, months, or years, depending on how long it takes. So I wanted to show this to you that when Rashi, without a whole lot of explanation, renders Elohim as having to do with mastery or being in charge and not anything divine, he's going l'shitato, according to his own methodology. He just doesn't quote himself, but thank God for the annotators who remember that a whole book ago, Rashi had said this about Elohim. So I wanted to point that out to you. Norm or Rachel, your hand was up a while ago.
I felt that this is not the only name of God that we use in other ways. Makom is an answer that pops into my mind. Another name of God that is used in non-divine ways. The only name of God I think that we only use to describe him is Yod-Heh Vav-Heh.
Right, which we never articulate, right? Even the way we pronounce Yod-Heh Vav-Heh, Adonai, is a word that is used in other forms, right?
Yeah.
I have to think about that if that's true for every other way we refer to God, right? Sure, like Tsur, Tsur Yisrael, God is not the only thing referred to as rock, but God is also referred to as rock. But Elohim etymologically seems to be a word that even before it was attached to our God in the Torah had a godlike quality to it, right? El is also a word in biblical Hebrew for God, for gods, right? So it's interesting that even that word, which doesn't mean rock or place and is applied metaphorically to what God can mean in our lives, but actually meant God, even that word can sometimes not mean God. Diane, Larry, and
So, not to dwell too long. First of all, I'm surprised about Rashi's comment because he doesn't usually, I don't think, he's not so open to sort of a biblical criticism perspective. But I think here this gets back to this whole constraint that we have, in part by speaking English and not by speaking Hebrew, and by talking about the name of God, the references to God, the concept of God, and just the fact that in English we use the word God, which is such an all-encompassing word. Yeah. If we were speaking Hebrew, we would differentiate between Hashem, Yud He Vav He, probably wouldn't pronounce it, but if we did pronounce it, El, and all the other references, and we don't. And because we don't, it trains our brain, I think, to not read the text the way in which, well, I would argue it was probably viewed early on. And if you try to, without abandoning your monotheism, if you try to read it like maybe an ancient Greek or Roman would read it and understand the references to God or Elohim, gods, and the concept and the fact that you had a lot of different gods, so you would have Zeus and this one and that one, etc., we might better understand sometimes the text and the stories.
I think it's a really helpful point, Mary. And for some reason, when you're unmuted, I hear echo.
Oh, it's Diane's fault. We know why. We're going to change it right now. It's because Diane, for her teaching, puts it on original sound. Just changed it. Sorry.
Okay. Just to be safe, I'm going to mute you also while I'm responding. I think it's a really helpful point, and we can't say it often enough. We're talking about ancient, heady, important things. So with such incredible obstacles. One of the obstacles is, of course, it's all guesswork unless you have perfect faith as to where this comes from and its connection to the cosmos. Another obstacle is no matter how good we are at language, it's impossible to really understand what any of these words meant to them then, which we've talked about all the time. And I really appreciate your focusing, Larry, on the obstacle of just the English problem itself of using three letters to denote something so unfathomably mysterious that our culture uses in all sorts of different ways. And we don't always know what the other person or even we ourselves mean by it when we say it. I'm reading a fascinating book right now, which is, it's unsettling. I like reading unsettling books. I like reading, I like leaving my echo chamber and instead of reading things that reinforce that which I already think and know, reading things that push me. So I'm reading a lot of Sam Harris's work right now. Sam Harris, if you know the name, he's a well-known neuroscientist and philosopher. Does a lot of thinking on meditation and mindfulness. He has a meditation app that I use occasionally. And he's an atheist, and he's a well-known atheist. And he kind of became popular in the late 90s, early 2000s when atheist literature became really significant in American culture. Hitchens and Dawkins. I find Harris more palatable, but his ideas are no less challenging. Like he really believes that religion is farcical, and he believes that moderate religion, even if in like the religions that I imagine all of us observe, even if in our own way our religion is not dangerous in the sense that we're willing to kill or die for it, the way often happens, according to him, throughout history on the fringes and the non-fringes of religion. He thinks that moderate religion is dangerous because we end up being a cover for the absolutism within religion, which cannot be critiqued because religion is, it's everyone says hands off to religion, not allowed to critique religion. Anyway, why do I bring this to you right now? He talks about the way in which the word God is used in American society, and we just accept it. We accept it because of momentum. We accept it because of the pressures that are still being brought to bear based on how the country was founded. But he says, if you want to make yourself feel really uncomfortable the next time you hear the president referring to "In God We Trust" or talking about "May God have mercy on the fallen soldiers," just replace God there with Apollo or Zeus, and you'll realize potentially what they might think of our language and our harnessing of that word God 1,000 years from now, right? May Zeus have mercy on the souls of the soldiers. We would laugh at that. We don't laugh at God, particularly those of us who have God or a God concept in our lives, right? And I'm not trying to veer into a fully theological hour here. There's nothing wrong with that, but part of that is the concept of God in the world, particularly for those who don't believe in it or who struggle to believe in it, and part of it is the word, right? The English word, which is the only word we really have. Sometimes you talk about the divine or a theological idea, but it's very, very hard to talk about God, and particularly to talk about it in English when we're trying to dissect the word Elohim. And Rashi is trying to tell us, and he might be right and he might be wrong, that back then in the time of the Torah, the word Elohim meant Elohim and it also didn't mean Elohim. Or the reason why the word Elohim meant God, is because there was something deeper in the construction of the word that had to do with authority, and therefore it's the part of God that has authority, but authority doesn't only adhere to the God concept, right? And that goes back to what Norm says, right? Like rock refers to a way in which, God is a prudential rock for us, but that's not the only way the word rock is used in society. And same thing with the authority built into the word Elohim. So all of that is an explication or deepening of a two-word Rashi saying, what does Elohim mean here? Rav or Sar. Barry, you've been very patient. Go ahead.
Well, there's not much I can add to this. This is very comprehensive. But just that we've had this discussion before that Elohim is a plural word referring to a singular. And so incorporating all the discussion we had, historically, anthropologically, it encompasses all the gods that people had in front of them into one word. So this is one gods of all.
Great. That's a really helpful comment. And it's actually, in some ways, accidentally helpful in the sense that when Elohim started to mean like a synonym for Adonai, for God, they could not have fathomed 21st century America. But I think what you're implying, and even if you're not implying, I'm going to extract from it, is that when we Americans say the word God, it actually has built within it a multiplicity of the gods that people pray to in their lives, right? But we only have one English word for it, right? Is on some level, does the Methodist pray to the same God that the Catholic does? It depends on what you mean by the question. If you're just replacing, right? If that God actually exists, then yes, because it's the God who contributed to the birth of Jesus and is the actual being, even if they get to it through different rituals. But if that God doesn't exist on a level of reality in the way that some true believers believe, then they're actually praying to very different gods, because the God that they're praying to is the construction of all of their rituals and narratives. And if they don't align, then they're not the same God, but they use the same word to attach to it. So even the English word God is in some ways Elohim. And I love the way you said it, Barry. God in English is almost like saying gods, unified into one, but one word, not one concept. Joel.
I would just add that the author of the Torah, the world began with Elohim. So the author created the word to encompass all gods that were believed in. God created this.
Yeah, great. Joel and Norm and Rachel.
Yeah, you mentioned you often say, and other people often say, what did these words mean to them at the time? But if you believe that it was created by an all-knowing being, there's no reason to believe that he wasn't talking to across generations. I know this artist who told me a story that she was working on a piece and she started working on it outside, and then the weather got bad or it got dark, so she moved it inside, and then she did a little bit in her studio and a little bit in her house. And when it was finished, she said it changed. When the light changed, the painting changed. So there's no reason to think that he was only talking to one generation.
Great. Wonderful comment. Thank you for that, Joel. Norm, Rachel?
I just want to suggest that even within the Jewish community, even though presumably we all pray to the one God, if we do it all, that our understanding of God varies a lot even among us. And how much the more so between Methodists and Catholics, it's their understanding of God that changes, I think, much more than God's self. Whether by a Muslim or one kind of Jew or another kind of Jew or one of the umpteen kinds of Christians.
Great. And you could push it further. Not only does that God concept change from sect to sect, it changes from within a person based on the circumstances of that person's reality, right?
Yeah.
One could really make the claim, depending on one's theological stance, that every time I say Baruch Atah Ad Hashem, I'm addressing a different God, because I'm actually constructing a God concept. Again, unless God qua God exists in some fixed way, which of course is a possible theology, right? But if we believe that we are partners in the ongoing construction of the God concept, then every time I say Baruch Atah Hashem, I am a creator of God, as it were, as I tell that story. I'm creating a God. I'm using the same name, but based on what I imagine God is in that moment and what prayer could accomplish, I'm actually creating something in the cosmos. And that's a frightening idea to some in the religious world who find great comfort in there being a singularity up there to which we respond. But it's actually not even primarily the Jewish way of understanding God. And I think that sometimes the absolutists actually are flattening a tremendously undulating notion of God that our ancestors were connected to and taught about. And in some ways, even though we, the 21st century, may vacillate in our faith in a way that the Rambam might not have understood or Rabbi Akiva might not have understood, our notion of something beyond a single commanding force who looks like a man and speaks with words is probably more akin to what our ancestors thought about than what the Haredim think that God is now. Rebecca, your hand was up and now it's down. Want to bring it up again? Going once?
I just wanted to say that it kind of sounds like a mathematical statement that God exists if and only if the limits of God from every religion are the same or identical. It's almost like that. It has to be an absolute agreement from all mathematical directions.
Great. Thank you for that. I was just also texting someone who said that this week's class was not on the week at a glance because originally I was supposed to be away this week. So that I think there's someone who wasn't sure if the class was happening because they properly trust the emails that we send out. And I forgot to correct it once I was not going to be away this week. So someone will be joining us hopefully in a minute.
We got in through Week at a Glance.
This week's Week at a Glance?
This week?
It was this Monday.
All right. Someone just texted me saying it wasn't there. Okay. Okay, that was going to be a 5-minute digression that became 25 minutes, which is fine. But let's now, unless there are any further questions, let's jump into the 6th aliyah of Parshat Shemot. This is a big deal. We're moving through. So chapter 4, verse 18. Joanna, do you want to read verse 18?
Sure. Vayelech Moshe, vayashov el Yeter chotno, vayomer lo, Elchana ve'ashuva el achai asher b'Mitzrayim, ve'ereh ha'odam chayim, vayomer Yitro leMoshe, lech leshalom. So Moses went and returned to Yeter, it says here, Yitro, his father-in-law, and he said to him, please, I will go and I will return to my brothers in Egypt, and I will see if they are still alive. And Yitro said to Moshe, go in peace. Great.
Nothing to correct or improve upon that translation. So let's go straight to questions one would have on the verse, right? You are Rashi. You're reading this presumably for the first time-ish. What jumps out at you as begging a question? Diane, Larry?
So I'm immediately going to disagree with Rashi.
Okay.
The first, I have a number of things. I'll be quick though. Try to be quick.
Wait, which Rashi are you going to disagree with? We haven't read Rashi yet.
I know we haven't, but I looked ahead.
Oh.
So I won't talk about Rashi. So the first thing I'm going to say is, wow, this is a really strange verse with, not strange verse so much, but has a lot of structure. So if I were to punctuate it with trope, I would put the etnachta. I'd have several etnachtas. I'd have a break after. I'd have a break where there is that pasik. I think it is the vertical line.
Yeah.
Etnachta. So Moses went. So Moses went and returned, which I want to draw your attention to. The went and returned, and then he went to Yitro, his father-in-law, and there's a whole issue about how many different names. It's not Yitro. It's Yeter. So this guy's got a lot of different names we know, and said to him, pause. That's be one of my first break. And then he says, I'll go and return. I'll go please and return. So we got the same thing, the holech v'yashav construction again, to my brothers who are in Mitzrayim, comma, and I'll see, I don't know the word odam, but I'll see their condition.
Odam is the word ode declined, right? Like ode, odcha, odam. Like we wouldn't do that in English, but their ongoingness. Are they ongoingness? Is their ongoingness alive? The ode. Is there moreness alive? So it's ode declined with the they ending.
And then we've got the etnachta at the Chaim. We'll see how they're faring, or how is going their life, and then we got the last verse, which is no problem, but we've got this break between V'yelech Moshe v'yashav, which I think is interesting, and I think there's got to be some reason for it. But then we've got, and Rick maybe comment on what I think is a really strange trope combination. We got merchat amapach pashta vayomer lo and a munach alcha. And then we got a revia, where normally I would expect to be a zakef katon. And I don't understand that at all. So it seems to me that the way the trope are working breaks up this verse kind of differently than I would expect.
Yeah. Great, Leah. Let me just comment on some of what you brought up, because you brought up some great things. The psik is something that we don't spend a lot of time on this class, even when Rick is giving us a trust drop. I want a trup drosh. Did I say trust drop? That was a funny exchange of syllables. So if you look after the third word in Hebrew, you have a vertical line. It's called a psik. Psik means like pasak, like a stop. Again, we don't know exactly why it's there. It's in the category of halacha la Moshe mi Sinai. It's been part of the text as long as we've had it from Sinai. Some laners are very precise, and they do like a quarter pause, just of silence. So they would lane it as Vayelech Moshe Vayashov El Yeter Chotno. Sometimes a psik is in a place you'd expect it. Well, obviously, even though we haven't gotten to the etnachta halfway through the verse, this is a good place for a pause. Sometimes the psik itself is in a category of ze omer darsheni. This psik is asking to be drashed out because the psik is between the verb and the indirect object, right? And he returned to Yeter, his father-in-law, right? So what's happening in between the verb telling us that he's returning and then finishing off the phrase, right? So that's a very interesting psik. I'd love to hear people thinking about it. I really appreciate, Larry, your pointing out that we've got in twice in the first half of the verse, if you are defining half as everything up until the etnachta, except that in this case, the etnachta, the wishbone, is about 3/4 or 4/5 of the way through the verse. So it's a very long first half of the verse, a very short second half of the verse. But twice within the first half of the verse, we have a doubling of a verb of going and returning. Vayelech Moshe v'yashov, Moshe went and returned. And then he's got in his own voice, El Chana v'ashuva, I will go and I will return. So that's also, again, just interesting. A past tense or a perfect verb of going and returning, and then him saying, I'm going to go and return, are both needed there. Let's just highlight for a second, you jumped over this, Larry, a little bit, the na there. We've had a lot of nas in the scene. Na is this very hard to translate word that suggests entreaty, suggests a softening of request. But here he's saying it to himself. Like normally the na is like ana elna rafana la. Moshe says to God, please God, I turn to you, God, heal her. It's turning a demand into a plea. But what does it mean when you're saying it about oneself? May I please go? Or I'm going to go, please. Well, who's the please addressed to? So maybe it makes us rethink what the na is. Is it a please or is it something else? Right. And you also pointed out that even in this verse, we've got two names of the father-in-law. In the second half of the verse, we have Yitro. In the first half of the verse, we have Yeter, clearly the same person. Is this a meter thing, right? Is this that sometimes the word is just shortened? Or is this, as Rashi is going to tell us, we have lots of names. So lots of stuff in this verse, even though there's no hard vocabulary. And a lot of people have thoughts on it. So this is going to take us a long time, which is wonderful. Elon.
So other than the two names for Jethro, the thing that strikes me the most is why does Moses not tell Jethro the real reason for him going to Egypt? The real reason is God spoke to him, told him to go to Egypt and to speak to Pharaoh. But Moses doesn't say that. He says, I'm going to Egypt to see whether my brethren are alive, or if you don't want to interpret it exactly that way, how they're doing. There's no indication prior to that is the reason. Is there a reason that he can't level with Jethro?
Yeah, that's a great question / insight, that it's almost as if the majority of what just transpired in the last chapter and a half by the burning bush is not present in Moshe's mind, or at least in terms of what he's communicating to Jethro. And you could ask a question on that question, Elon, which is that, does he really not know whether his brothers are Chaim? Because if he doesn't know that, is he suggesting that God is telling him a tall tale? So is there some tactical reason he's giving that as the explanation to Jethro? He knows exactly the situation. He just spent a chapter and a half dealing with it, right? Ha'odam Chaim, ve'ereh ha'odam Chaim. Maybe in a moment we can look at different translations of that, but it's very hard to understand that anything other than I need to go see if they're still alive and therefore exodusable, right? Tova.
I was initially going to comment on what Larry commented about the Vayelek, Vayashav, but as that conversation is developed, I noticed what I find very interesting. We have those two pairings you already mentioned of go and return, but then at the end we have Vayomer Yitro LeMoshe, Lake LeShalom. And it's just go in peace, not go and return in peace, or go in peace and return in peace, but just go in peace.
Yeah.
Which I don't know quite how to take, perhaps reflecting some kind of prophetic knowledge on the part of Yitro himself that in fact, this is what you're intended to do and you will not be returning. But it seems striking when we have those previous pairs.
Even more so when you just cheat ahead to begin the next verse, when God now pipes in and God says to Moshe, Lech Shuv. So God repeats the doubling of go and return.
Right.
Whereas Yitro is just saying go, right? So that either means something or nothing.
Right.
Great. Joanna?
A few things. So Are My Brothers Alive are taking me to what's coming up in Parshat HaShavua, which is when the brothers finally reveal themselves to Joseph, or when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers and, looks to them and says, is my father still alive? Now, if Joseph had been paying attention, he would know that the brothers had been referencing their father all along. The father's still alive. So there's something very funny about what you know, but you need to have confirmed. And also, we've been discussing the past number of weeks references back into the Breshit stories and were they aware of them? So I think there's a really interesting play there. In terms of also the doublings, I'm also fascinated as we read through Torah, every time like we're reminded of a relationship that we already know. So among all the doublings in this verse, why do we need to be told that Yitro was Moses' father-in-law? Like that's been established already. You talk about Yitro, we know who you're talking about. And also intriguing in terms of all the doublings, the root shov return by Yashov really stands out because for a perfect parallelism in this verse, it would have been great if Yitro ended by saying Lech shov leshalom. And there's no shov in Yitro's remarks back to Moshe, which really, to me, makes the returning and what is all that about in the first part of the verse stand out.
All great stuff, Joanna. Thank you for that. The question of why we need to be reminded that Yitro is Moshe's chotain is interesting. We have that all the time, and it's a lot of grist for midrash, right? We know whether it's why we need to know that Miriam is Moshe's sister in this particular situation is really interesting. Since you mentioned that word chotno, just a little bit of a digression. If you look at the word chotno there, it's the sixth word of the verse. Underneath the chet, there's a small vertical line. I don't know if we ever paid much attention to that diacritical mark. That's called a meteg. The meteg in a word does the same thing that a psik does in a verse. It's a partial pause in a place where you wouldn't normally pause. Like I know very few laners who even try to make sense of this, but it's basically saying that the stress on the word is where the trup is, the no. But if you want to be really precise, you don't pronounce it as chotno, but chotno. Like there's the meteg says there's a eighth pause, right, in this word. Why, we don't know, and not every word has it. But sometimes it has it when a word is asking to be stressed in a place beyond the main stress, the main stressed syllable. Great. And I love your connection, Joanna, to Ha'od Abichai, right? So because it does speak to the interbook lyricism of the book, which suggests any number of things, right? We always have to like hedge our bets here. It suggests that a singular divine author was true to methodology, or it speaks to the fact that when certain verses were being constructed, there was a communal awareness of the sound and the song of earlier strands of the story, and so it's not the only way that those sentences can be constructed. So it seems intentional to be evocative of the last major reunion, which you're right is this week, Parshat Miketz. Great, Rebecca, and then Barry, and then Sue, and then Renee.
I had a couple of thoughts. The thing that really stands out to me is that nowhere leading up to here was Moshe told to go back to Yitro. Why does he even, he's being told to go back to Egypt. Why does he go there? He hasn't been told to go get his stuff or anything. So that kind of stood out to me. The other thought is that related to what Larry and you discussed about the psik, and that is that Vayeshev or Vayashov, it may be that there's a sort of an interpretation here that there is a certain amount of time that passed, so that Moshe returned and sat rather than returned. And the psik is sort of highlighting that this is the use of the word not as a return, but as settled down again for a few days or months or years, because we don't really know how long it took. So that might be related to that piece of that line there.
I love that, Rebecca. The root shav and yashav are cousins, right? And they're neither interchangeable nor completely set apart from each other. So it's properly translated that vayashov is from the root shav, meaning to return, but it's definitely evocative of yishuv, a settling. And even a settling It's different than a sitting, right? The common mistake halachically in Sukkot, leishev basukkah does not mean to sit in the sukkah, such that in order to fulfill the mitzvah, you have to sit. Leishev there means to do yishuv, to settle in the sukkah. And how do you settle in the sukkah? By showing that you're living there by taking a drink. So when I lead kiddush in the sukkah, there's also a custom to sit when you do kiddush, but you don't have to. Just by eating something in the sukkah, you're fulfilling leishev basukkah. It's not lashevet to sit, but leishev to settle. So these are words that are related to each other, and I'm really moved by that that psik suggesting that there was a settling, that there was that even though Moshe is being told it's an emergency, by God, he goes vayelech Moshe vayasho. And he hangs out with his father-in-law until it becomes the right time to mention what's happening next. Wonderful. Barry.
Okay, two things. First, it begins with Yelech and it ends with Lech. So it begins with the going and ends with the going. As the book ended. Now, I want to look at this experientially. At the burning bush and all the subsequent discussions we've had, Moshe is in ultra super space with God. I mean, he's not in a normal world space environment, talking to God all this time. So the first use of Yashov, he leaves. Okay, and now there's experiencing how does it feel to be popped out of that space and popped back into reality. He's got sheep that he's been herding before this all began. The sheep belong to his father-in-law, so he's popped back into this space where he belongs to his father-in-law, and also it's not his people; it's his father-in-law, not his people. And so that experientially, he has to go through this process first. And then Yitro then sends him forward.
Great, thank you. Sue and then Renee.
I find myself super interested in this psik. What I'm thinking about is that it's a vayashov, and with this psik, because the later on when Moshe goes into the Ohel Moed and goes up to the mountain and comes down, he looks different. He is all aglow, and he clearly commands an entirely different response from the Kahal. And so it seems like the return with the psik, it's like, well, yeah, he returned, but maybe he wasn't exactly the same as before he met up with God. And then we fascinatingly get El Yeter Hono, who is who he came back to, but Yeter is not Yitro, it's Yeter. And Yeter, you have to say Hono, because it can just be that what was left of him came back, or Yitro saw that what was there wasn't the same, and Yeter saw he saw that there was something else, and that's why Yeter can say, yeah, go, but whether or not he's coming back, who knows, because there's something entirely different in this moment, and I think it's in the psik.
Yeah, that psik is really catching people's attention. There's another Rashi. Rashi is about to tell us, if we get to it this week or next week, the notion of the many names of Yitro. There's another Rashi that actually goes into the etymology of it as to why Yitro is called Yitro in different places, and that does play with the meaning of Yetro, meaning extra, yoter, right? And when it's in this form, Yeter does even more sound like a Hebrew word, that he returned to the extra or the remaining part of his father-in-law,
or his life,
or his life. Yeah, the psik is a rare thing. I was just flipping while you were talking. I think the last psik was in the 8th verse of chapter 3. if you look, and this is going to mean nothing, but it's just interesting to compare it, because I don't think that you can like just create an archipelago drash of all the psiks in the Torah. But just as a way of pointing out, it's been a long time ago, unless I missed one. The last psik was chapter 3, verse 8, right at the beginning of the bush, of the scene that's about to end, by the way. We're at the very beginning of the burning bush. And God says, Va'ered, I will go down, lahatzilo, to rescue him. The him here is the people, the Am, psik. I will go down and rescue him. Miad Mitzrayim, from the hand of Egypt, Halatomina Aratzahi, and to bring him up, the people up from that land. So once you start being psik aware, it's hard not to be psik aware and wonder what's happening in that pause, right? From what I know, even though sometimes laners pause there's not a whole lot of classic midrash that's based on the psik. Like I can't even think of one situation where the engine for a midrash and midrash rabbah is the presence or absence of it. But that doesn't mean that it's not present for us to be playful with. Renee and then Joanna.
Okay, so some of the stuff that I was going to say has already been said, but two other things that are interesting is that Moshe doesn't say anything to Yitro about what happened to him with earlier in the story with God and him being on the mountain. He doesn't mention any of that, which is kind of interesting.
Which meaning by the burning bush?
Yeah, right. Back in Breshit. And also, it's interesting that Everett Fox doesn't use the word please let me go, but he says, pray let me go. And I just wonder if that's a different kind of connotation even than the please.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to look at some of the translation of this verse. You know, pray in English is another word that we mean, but there's no sense that every person who says the word means the same thing. And sometimes pray is a verb, and sometimes pray is like, you know, if you think of the way old poetry or Shakespearean or later than Shakespearean English might be like, you know, pray, Lord, may I come enter your presence, right? It's almost as if pray, saying the word pray, isn't of itself a prayer, a plea, a request, right?
And in Saperstein, the plea, even though it uses the please, it sounds like that kind of request. He says, let me go, please. Let me go, comma, please, comma.
Yeah, right, because the translations are trying to deal with the na there. Remember, I raised the question of what does it mean to add a na when you're addressing your own activity, right? He's not asking Yitro for permission, but the translations render it as if he's saying, as if the word elcha, I will go, is in and of itself a request. May I go? May I leave? You know, can you watch the kids for a bit, right? May I go? Which is not the only way to understand the na. The Everett Fox on the full verse, because we were going to look at some translations, particularly of the Ha'odam Chaim, is Moshe went and returned. Both verbs are presented to Yitro, his father-in-law. So Everett Fox translates it not as Yeter, but Yitro, and said to him, pray, let me go and return. So both verbs are there. To my brothers that are in Egypt, that I may see whether they are still alive. Ha'odam Chaim. A lot of English words, only 3 Hebrew words. Yitro said to Moshe, go in peace. I'd be interested in hearing some other translations, particularly if there's anyone that does not render Ha'odam Chaim about being alive, and if any of them combines the verbs that doesn't have a different verb in English for the el elech and the ashuv, because we've spent a lot of time talking about the significance of those 2 verbs. Joanna?
As happens, as you're looking at the text, your eye kind of jumps ahead a little bit. And as I looked at the next verse where God is once again talking to Moshe, in my initial read of it, I was like, this verse is out of place. This belongs at the end of the burning bush episode. And then it would read more clearly, Moses goes to his father-in-law and then he gathers his things and he leaves. Like that interjection of God speaking again seems out of place. But now, and what also jumped up at me was that God spoke to Moshe and Midian. Like, why do we need to highlight that? And but now it works very nicely, I think, with the playing of the meaning of Vayashov and what root are we at and what does it mean? Because it works very well if Moses kind of settled and lingered there, because God is basically saying to him now in this verse, what are you doing here? Get up. Why are you still in Midian? Get up, go. So I just wanted to point out that I thought that all of a sudden something that didn't make sense made sense as a result of something someone said. Great. So that's highlighting Rebecca's comment before about the psik and lingering, because as you know, I know Larry likes to sometimes rearrange or imagine a rearranged version of a verse or where the punctuation is. It seems on the pshat level, before you just said what you said, Joanna, that verse 19 should come before verse 18, right? We'll read verse 19 more closely next week. God said to Moses, in Midian, if you take the Midian part out, unless you imagine that is Midian different than where the burning bush was, or is the burning bush within Midian? Go back to Egypt because it's safe now. Well, shouldn't that be the end of the burning bush scene? So why is it placed after Moshe goes back and speaks to Yitro? Maybe he goes back and he's considering the offer, right? It doesn't. The burning bush scene doesn't end with Moshe basically saying, "I'm packing my bags now." The last thing he says is, "Shalach biad tishlach." Send who you want to send, Moshe, God. Meaning, I basically accept the job, but it's not clear. Then he goes back and hangs out with his father-in-law's family. So maybe that Vayashov psik is the linchpin. Norm,
I don't think he goes to hang out. I think that we're maybe misunderstanding go and return. Yesterday, Rachel went to shul and then she returned to here. And that's a common way we use these words. But in this case, go and return, I think, is the same. Remember, when this conversation started, Moshe wasn't simply on a hike. He was herding a flock.
Good.
So he has this flock with him. He's not going to take the flock of sheep or goats or whatever they are to Egypt. He's going to return them where they belong. He's going to explain, I can't shepherd for you tomorrow because I'm going off to Egypt. Even if he's not asking for permission and a blessing, he's got to inform his employer or somebody to take care of the sheep. And if I had a father-in-law in Midian and I was about to go off to Egypt with or without his daughter, my wife, I wouldn't do it without informing my in-laws and probably asking for their blessing on the entire endeavor. So when it says he went and returned, he went and returned. Where did he go and return to? He left from Har Sinai. He returned to his father-in-law where he would be able to leave the flocks and whatever else he was going to leave and bring with him whatever he was going to bring. And then we can go on with him explaining what he's doing or planning to do or wants to do. And he gets Jethro's permission. I think it's completely reasonable that it's understood just that way.
Great. I love that you brought back the context of what he was doing before God spoke to him from a bush. He was working for his father-in-law. That's great. So he has to go back. Very helpful comment. Diane, Larry?
You asked about translations. Both Alter and Aryeh Kaplan have the same translation, which is to see if they are still alive. But Aryeh Kaplan does something quite interesting, which I think maybe helps to explain and confirm some of the comments made about the Yelech v'Yashov. He says he translates the second part, and he said to his father-in-law Yeter, he said, "I would like to leave and return to my people in Egypt." So he doesn't say please; he says, "I would like to," which is a polite way of saying the same thing. Yeah. But listen to, "I'd like to leave and return to my people in Egypt." So it's separating the holech is going or leaving. I know those are different verbs, but going or leaving, and then the yashav is where you're going to. So It's completely separating those two things. He's just saying to his father-in-law, "I got to go, goodbye." He's saying, "I got to go, and I'm returning to my people."
It's as if Aryeh Kaplan is intuiting a psik in between Elchana and V'yashuva. Vayomer Elchana, v'ashuva elachai asher b'Mitzrayim. Yeah.
Well, just the last comment. Rick has been strangely silent. I've even been prodding him with text to try to get him to say something. I think, but tell me that I'm wrong, that Rivia Anna is really unusual. I don't remember, I'm not an expert, I don't have recall like you and Rick do. I don't recall a Mercha, Tibcha, Munach, Rivia. Maybe they exist, but I don't recall ever.
No, it doesn't happen. I was happy listening.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Larry. It's not Mercha, Tibcha, but Mapach Pashta. I'm
sorry, Mapach Pashta.
It doesn't never happen, nor is it common, right? There are Trupp families that, which is the way that Rick, really any Trupp teacher does it, but Rick does it with a color-coded system, where these Trupps always come together, and sometimes those Trupp families are shortened. So the four family Mapach Pashta Munach Katon, na 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 na. Sometimes all four appear. And sometimes the third one is missing. Da 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 da. And sometimes the first one is missing. Da 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 da. And sometimes just the last two. Da 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 da. But when those Trupp families are shortened, they're rarely interrupted with another Trupp, a member of another Trupp family that doesn't go with it. So you're right. In the ways in which the four member family of Mapach, Pashta, Munach, Chaton is generally shortened, it's never shortened to just Mapach, Pashta. It has to be resolved musically. So you're right. It's as if someone came in. There was like a changing of the staff, and they had composed or written the first Mapach Pashta, and then when the next staff came in, they forgot they were in the middle of a Mapach Pashta clause, and someone said, let's put a Revi'i here. It is odd. I don't know if it's 1 in 100 odd or 1 in 500 odd, but it is odd. And we also don't know, of course, is the Trupp creating meaning or responding to conceived of meaning? But you're absolutely right that da 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 does not go like you could. My guess is that the next 500 times you see Mapach Pashta in the Torah, you would not have a Revi afterwards. Rick, would you agree that that's probably, we're in the numerical realm there?
Yes, Rabbi. I always agree with you.
Oh.
And then there's also the directionality that I've noticed lately. So Moses appearing before Yitro, he's going to bow his head a little bit and say, how you doing, Dad? I need to get out. So there's that.
All right, great. So we successfully spent a full shiur on one verse with no hard vocabulary without even getting to the Rashi, which is why I love this experience so much.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.